All right, welcome back to the 12 or so of you who will actually watch this video. Thanks for watching, Mom. Anyway, before I dig into today's topic on how to wrangle your tomatoes, I just want to show off the most notable change to the garden over the last couple of weeks, which is the installation of the shade cloth. Over the last 2 weeks or so, the temperature kind of shot right up from 60s and 70s to mid to upper 90s. And when that happens, I like to get the shade cloth in place because it kind of takes the edge off the sun. We have a southern facing backyard here, and as you can see, not a lot for trees. So that can actually cause, if left just as is, it can cause a lot of sun scald on plants and fruits alike. So I got that up, and once we started doing this was kind of one of our gardening game changers here in the Sacramento Valley. It really takes the edge off the super hot summers. So there is that. All right, now let's talk a little bit about how to control your tomatoes and keep them from completely taking over your garden beds. There are already a lot of videos, blog posts, etc. on this very topic, but I figured, why not do one of my own and kind of show off my own take on it, which is driven a lot by cheapness and cutting costs. So here we go. First, I'm going to address how to control determinate tomatoes, because that's honestly an easier task than indeterminate. For anybody watching this who happens to be very new to tomatoes, a determinate tomato is, as it sounds, genetically predisposed to grow to a certain given height that can be anywhere between 1.5 feet and 4 feet tall. These ones here are my Rio Grandes, and they're at about 2.5 feet at this point. Also, they're going to pretty much set all of their fruit at the same time. Hopefully they'll all ripen at the same time, and then the plant is going to be done with its life cycle. So because of this, there's not a ton of pruning that you're going to want to do. All the sucker shoots, you're going to want to let them go, because that means more production, more fruit. If you cut those, you're going to be severely limiting how much you get out of the plant. So all I'm really doing here is I have cut some lower branches, pruned, and we got some nice fruits. Just the very lower branches, so that anything touching the ground, it's not going to pick up any diseases. Kind of letting air to flow through to control fungus. Not that I'm super worried about any kind of fungus here in the Sacramento Valley. Our summers are so hot and dry, and moisture is something that is essential for fungal growth. So, but still, I like getting out and working on the garden. It's good for my mental health. And it doesn't hurt to trim the lower branches and let some air through. So after that, all I'm really going to do is, as if any branches get heavily laden with fruit, or any of the plants start to lean over, I'm just going to secure to these posts with some soft twine. And that's about it. Some people will use tomato cages for their determinates, and that's great. I'm sure they work, but the problem is it's added cost. Even if you can find a super great deal and get a tomato cage for $5 a piece, and when you have 10, 12, 14 or more indeterminate tomato plants, that kind of adds up and gets to be more of a cost, where I can use, cut some posts from some repurposed old fence boards, and I have a practically free stake that I can use to help wrangle my determinates. And that's about it. Let's kind of see how that goes as we get further into the season here. All right, so this black cherry tomato plant, this is an indeterminate type tomato. So what this means is, as the name would imply, it's going to just, its growth and its maximum size and yield is very potentially infinite. As long as nothing comes along to kill off the plant, no frost, no animals, no major accidents, this is just going to kind of keep growing and producing. As long as it's, getting enough food and nutrients and water, it should just keep going. In reality, that doesn't always play out that way. Everything ultimately does have a lifespan, but compared to a determinate tomato, these will go a lot longer. So what this means is that these buggers can get out of hand in a hurry. The last years, we didn't prune and really any of our indeterminate tomatoes, and we wound up with right here, splicing this in. Photos from last year. This is what I refer to as an impenetrable tomato hedge. And while it did produce a ton of tomatoes, the problem was that it was near impossible to get in and really harvest everything. It was hard to get in and work on the tomatoes once we reached a point of no return. Pruning became impractical, so we just kind of had to let it go and do its things. So this year, I am pruning and employing a support structure called a drop string trellis, which will span up here a little bit. So basically what I've done is I have run a taut line of cable between two support posts all the way down here. And to that, I affixed these cheap lumber stakes. These were about $1.50 a piece, so I used those. A lot of designs of this they'll just use a string dropping down from the primary line up top, anchored into the ground with like a landscape staple or something like that. I wasn't convinced that that would hold up in, we get a wind that'll kick up sometimes in the summertime here. Yeah, we get a hot wind. It'll be like 95 and pretty windy. It's like living in a convection oven. But I wasn't convinced that just having a string dropping down as the primary support would really hold up in those conditions. So I wanted a nice solid stake to at least support the primary vine. And that's just kind of what you do as the plant grows. You can either you pick one main stem and trim off all of the suckers, and I'll get to what a sucker is in a moment here. So there's one main stem, and you can train that to go right vertical up this stake here. You can just do one, but in my case, I want a little extra production out of each plant, so I chose one sucker early on to become a secondary vine. And here it is right here. So I'm going to grow these two primarily, and I'm going to trim off any other new growth, any other suckers, because what will happen if you don't, the suckers will basically what a sucker turns into is a whole new tomato plant. And then that will sprout its own suckers, and so on, before you know it, everything's out of control. So what a sucker is they typically, this right here is a sucker. It will grow from the junction of the main stem and one of the branches here. Pretty much almost every junction of the stem and a branch will ultimately produce a sucker. So what I'm going to do, and I'm trying to do this one-handed, I'm going to take my clippers here, and always sterilize with alcohol or something first so you're not potentially infecting the plant. And I'm just going to clip it. There. So if you do this early on, and you kind of, take care of this a little bit every day, every other day, it won't get out of hand. And then as you can see, the main stem here, I've just taken some flexible material. I actually bought this. It's a biodegradable kind of garden twine made out of cotton. So I've been kind of conscious a little bit about the idea of microplastics breaking down in my garden. Even though, I was born in the 80s, so it's closing the barn door after the cows have escaped, so to speak. But still, I just don't like the idea of having so much plastic in my garden, shedding, little particles that we all eat and stays with us forever. So this is just, it's kind of stretchy, flexible, so as the stem expands and grows, it won't, the ligature won't cut into and constrict the plant itself. For this, and I'm going to have to pause here soon, there is just a little, basically, and I'll show it in a second, a spool with a hook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect that to the top line here. You can buy something like this, but I had enough materials and scraps and stuff left over from other various projects that I just kind of rigged something up real quick. It's a pretty simple device and spool of line that I'm going to connect to that kind of drooping tomato branch here in a second, and a hook on the top to keep it in place up there. All right, so what I did here was I took and I made just a loop out of the soft, flexible twine, and I tied the twine from my spool hanger thingy, that's what I'll call it, spool hanger thingy, works for me, to that soft loop. I don't really want the the coarse, tough twine touching or being tied tightly to the tomato vine here. And then I gave it enough slack to run it up all the way to the top cable. So as this branch grows, all I'm going to have to do is kind of gently wind it around and keep it kind of twisted up with this twine. And that will give it more than enough support, hopefully. All right, so here I've left one of our San Marzano tomatoes. I let it kind of go a little bit for demonstration purposes, so I'm going to kind of just demonstrate how I've been pruning. And to a degree, I've been kind of winging it. I've been watching and reading up on, the best way to prune tomatoes. But it feels sometimes very unnatural to start clipping away at your vegetable plants. So I'm sure it's going to work out fine, but it's kind of a hard thing to force myself to do. So this is what I've been doing. The first thing is I'm going to clean up everything around the bottom here. Going to clear some of the lower branches to let a little air and light in so I can see what I'm doing. I want to be careful not to cut any. You probably can't see it from this angle, but I've already found a tomato that's forming. So I'm not going to want to go too far. I'll get rid of this sucker here. And that, trim this up. I'm basically going to cut this all the way down, so give this fruit some room to get some light. I'll give this, actually, I'm going to basically clear everything that isn't fruit for the first, I don't know, foot or so. We've got a sucker here. Get rid of that. Clear this branch. This sucker. And what am I going to use as my second stem? So this one closest to the stake here is going to definitely be the main stem. So the more I clean this up, the more it will become obvious what the logical choice for the secondary stem is. Okay, now So as I'm clearing out here, I am seeing that there are two really thick stems here. So I've got a choice to make, or I can kind of think what I'm actually going to do here. These both look like really healthy, beefy stems that are going to yield a lot of fruit. So I'm going to actually leave both of these and do a triple stem on this plant here alone, because it just seems a shame to clip those, especially when they're both already, forming flowers. And clearing out some of the branches is great, but I don't want to go too far because it does need leaves for photosynthesis, of course. So I think that that's actually as far as I'm going to go with this one right now. I'm going to get a few more things and I will be right back. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some string and twine to secure the main stem to that post, and then I'm going to use another hook and spool to give that secondary vine that's bending way off there toward the chicken coop a little extra support. So here we go. And you can gently move the plant to where you want it to be. Obviously, you don't want to wrench on it too much, but you don't have to treat it like a Fabergé egg, to be sure. I really like when I can train the main stem to grow as close to vertical up the stake as possible. I don't know. There we go. All right, now it's time to give these guys a little bit of support here. I'm going to start with just one hook and spool. And if I need to do a whole separate one for the third vine, I will later. Ah, you gotta love the barking dogs. Now, if we get the barking dogs, the loud cars, the airplanes, we can have the noise trifecta. All right, now let's take some slack off of my spool here. I'm hooking it to the cable overhead. All right. And I think I'm going to do something a little makeshift here because I am the king of makeshift. And instead of using, for now, a whole new spool and hook setup, I'm going to tie this guy to the twine. And no, I was never a Boy Scout, as you can tell by my simple granny knots that I use. But they hold everything in place. They're easy to do, so that's good enough for me. All right, there you have it. This is a, for now, successfully wrangled indeterminate tomato. All right, Thanks for watching to everyone who did on my new YouTube channel. And since I'm terrible at coming up with conclusions for my things, writing and video, I'm just going to leave it with some footage of our chickens eating some watermelon rinds. Here you go.